Good morning to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Legal Refresher for B&Bs and Hotels. I'm Janae Wyatt, CH&LA Member Services Coordinator. Just a few quick announcements. Our next webinar, entitled The Future of Hospitality Guest Satisfaction, which is scheduled for January 16th. It's going to be presented by Greg Bodenlos of Revinate. He'll be discussing such topics as new technologies for driving sales, driving feedback to sites like TripAdvisor, and more. And then also Jim Abrams, along with Jeffrey Thorell of Fisher & Phillips. They're going to be presenting 2 in-person seminars discussing new laws for the state of California, and also including an employment legislative update. So the dates on those are January 22nd at the Embassy Suites in LAX South, which is in El Segundo, and then January 28th at the Grand Hyatt in San Francisco. So for more information for either of these events or to register, you can always visit calodging.com/events. Okay, today's presenter needs a little introduction. He is Jim Abrams, former CH&LA President and CEO from 1991 through to the lodging and hospitality industries, and has provided representation and advice at both the state and national level. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Jim.
Thanks, Janae, and welcome to all of you. I'm glad to have you on this webinar. As we get started, my email address is showing on the slide, and my services are free to all CH&LA and CABI members. Anytime you want to call me 100 times a week, you're free to call me 100 times a week. I might get grumpy about the 90th call, but that's okay. You're entitled to my services, and I like nothing better than to be able to help members of the association figure things out and, number one, stay out of trouble, and number two, make the most of their operations. I do want to mention to you that a lot of resources are free to you whenever you want them through calodging.com. And if you go into the members only section, and your email is your username, and then you have a member ID number, that'll get you in. And then there are a lot of things there, like hot topics, webinars, advocacy resources, occupancy and daily rate reports, legal resources, hiring and employment guides, job descriptions, and many, many other things. So be sure to take advantage of all of that, and because it's available 24/7. It includes the law book, California Lodging Law, which I've updated through Chapter 13, still working on the rest of it a little bit. But be sure, whenever you have questions, contact me or see what you can find at calodging.com. The things that we're going to cover today, and Janae, if you can go to the next slide, excuse me, the slide. We're going to cover a lot of different things that I know people have questions about or aren't aware of or are confused about. They are the focus of a lot of the questions that I get from members. But I'm not going to cover everything that applies to operating a hotel. And the law book, CA Lodging, covers all of the various topics. And it may be a place you want to go just to kind of see if there's information available on whatever it is that I'm not covering today. And also another quick starter, I'm going to use the word innkeeper here to refer to anybody who owns or operates any kind of a transient lodging establishment. And then also I do want to mention to you, and forgive me for not saying it a minute ago, that I can see questions. So if you want, you can type in questions. They appear on my screen, and then I will try and include answer to those questions in my presentation. The next slide, Janae, please. Here's a quick list of the things that we're going to cover. And again, these are things that I know are problematic for people based on the questions that I get. People are always concerned about bad TripAdvisor and Yelp reviews and things like that. So I want to give you some basics. And then I want to get into a little bit of background, and should be a refresher course for you in how hotel reservations work. When do you have a binding contract that puts obligations on you legally and that puts obligations on your guests from a legal standpoint? We're going to talk about the basic obligations to provide rooms. There's a lot of confusion. what grounds you have lawfully to refuse to provide rooms to people, and we're going to touch on minors in particular because there are a lot of people running into trouble with policies that refuse or limit the rights of minors to stay in the hotel. And then your respective rights vis-a-vis your guests and their rights vis-a-vis you when they're in the hotel. When and how you can evict guests. People are very unsure about this, and if you do it incorrectly, it can cause a great deal of liability. We're going to also touch on your liability, which is really very limited liability with respect to loss, damage, and stolen property of your guests. And then a couple of places where I think people have problems. Guest room posting requirements, there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty or just plain ignorance. You're not bad innkeepers, just a lot of the stuff isn't known to you, especially if you've come from out of state. And I want to go over those. And alcoholic beverages. I just got a question earlier this morning from somebody who wants to have a small 10-room inn and wants to have a quote romance close quote package that includes champagne. Can you do that? Yes, you can, but you need a license. So I want to touch on some of those items. Next slide, please, Janae. TripAdvisor, Yelp reviews. To go at the beginning, these services, these guest comment kinds of services, customer comment services, can be extremely positive. And a lot of innkeepers to whom I've spoken over the years tell me that they make a conscious effort to get guests who have been happy with their stay to post comments on TripAdvisor or Yelp or something saying that the Jim Abrams Hotel was great, they went out of their way to provide excellent service, whatever the truth is. And again, you don't want to get caught in the situation where you're posting your own good reviews. You want your guests to do it. Because that can help you not only in driving business if you have good reviews up there, but it also helps you fight any negative reviews. If you get a negative review, I guess quickly said they fall into two categories. One is where somebody just truly, honestly was unhappy, and they say, I didn't like the Jim Abrams Hotel because nobody washed the windows, and obviously in 20 years, or the trash was never emptied, or the staff was surly, whatever. And if the person honestly feels that, that's one kind of situation. And the other kind, which causes the most angst, is where a guest is obviously trying to be vindictive. In many cases, they're trying to extort money or free rooms from you by threatening to post bad reviews and things like that. You kind of need to distinguish between the two. And advice really is like this. Check the reviews frequently. If you aren't checking Yelp and TripAdvisor and any other services that are used frequently on at least a daily basis, many people I know check them at least 2, 3, 4 times a day, you're really missing the boat. Number one, if somebody's posted a good review, you want to know about that, but more importantly, if there's a negative review, you want to deal with it right away. You want to respond immediately. And if it's a legitimate complaint, you want to, number one, contact the guest and say, I'm so sorry, I see on TripAdvisor that you were unhappy here. We are taking steps to correct the problems you've noted. We would love to have you come back, whatever you'd like to do in terms of a business response. But also you want to make it clear to the people who are looking, you can go on, and there's a management response tool, and you can go on and say, this person was right. It's unusual. As you can see, we've got plenty of positive reviews, but we're taking steps to fix this problem. Or if the guest was just incorrect, you want to point that out. For example, a hotel in San Francisco got a bad TripAdvisor review saying that the hotel had no air conditioning, and the manager got on immediately and said, no, we don't have any air conditioning. The hotel was built in the 1930s. San Francisco is very cool. The window's open, so you don't need air conditioning, and it says on our website that we don't provide air conditioning. So they basically just pointed out the truth and negated the bad review. If you get somebody who is in the dishonest, extortionist camp, again, you can use the management response function, hopefully to get the review removed immediately. And TripAdvisor, I know for a fact, will often remove what are truly, obviously, vitriolic postings. But also you can go on and just set forth the facts. This guest never stayed here. he wanted a free room, and he said that if we didn't give him a free room, he was going to post a horrible review, and so we just want the facts to be straight here. But when you do that, you've got to be very honest about it. You can't get angry. You've got to, take a deep breath and say, here are the facts. The guy never stayed here, or the guy stayed here, and the next morning he came up and said that if we didn't give him his room free, he was going to post a bad review. Just state it exactly as it is. As long as you can prove what the person said or did, you're fine. But if you start making things up, you say this guy is obviously some sort of a crook and a liar, you've now defamed him. And you don't want to do that because you can get into trouble. So you want to respond to these things promptly and appropriately. And if you have questions, as always, if you have a situation come up and you're not sure what to do, give me a call. Next one, Janae, please. Contract law basics. And people, I find in the lodging industry, are not quite sure how this all works. First of all, when a guest calls up or emails you or walks in or whatever and says, I want a room for the night of January 15th, and you say, that's fine, sir, we have a room for January 15th, and you go through the details of what kind of room the person wants and what the room rates are and everything else. And once the guest basically says, all right, I want that room for $150, including the 10% bed tax. Once the guest has said, I will take that room if you offer it to me, and you say, we accept your offer, and we will provide you that room in return for the money, or vice versa, you have a binding legal contract. And as such, it's a situation, a relationship where if you fail to carry out any material terms of the contract, the guest is entitled to sue you if it ever comes to that. 99% of the time it doesn't. But the guest is entitled to some legal relief. And conversely, if the guest breaches the contract, you are entitled to some legal relief. A couple of caveats in there that we'll get to in a moment. So you need to understand that I promise to provide you a room if you pay me $100, and yes, I promise to pay you $100 for the room, and you've spelled out all the details. That's a binding legal contract. It does not have to be in writing to be valid, but it's often good to send a confirming email, even if it's just including terms that are already on your website, especially if you have any particular specifications or rules and regulations that are not always encountered in hotel reservations. So if you have situations where guests say, gee, you never told me this, or I didn't know that I could only swim in the pool from 11 to 12 in the morning, and I can't swim in the pool any other time, things like that are unusual, not necessarily bad, but just unusual, you want to make sure that you have notified the guest of that. And so if ever it comes down to the question of whether he or she knew or should have known of the requirement, you can prove that it was on your website, you sent a confirming email, and so that's especially important. It's a good thing to do in all cases, to send a confirming email, but it's a very good thing to do if you've got any unusual terms or conditions. All specific details need to be clearly spelled out, so you want to have such obvious things as check-in time, check-out time, what happens if the guest isn't out by check-out time, another day's rate will be applied, or whatever you do. That's up to you. But you want to lay all that out. You want to lay out if you have, if you're a no-pet hotel or a no-smoking hotel, you want to lay all those things out so there's never any question that the guest agreed to all those rules and regulations and policies when he or she agreed to the reservation and the contract was basically formed. And if you have certain specific details that become problematic for you, in the sense that guests complain that they didn't know X or Y or Z, you want to be able to show that they knew. It was on the website, it was in the confirming email, and things like that. So you want to lay out all of the details and make sure there's no question about what it is that the basic contract contained. We all run into situations where the guest says, I really want the room with the biggest bed in it, or I want a room that's a non-smoking room, or I want this or that, and hotels often say, we'll do our best to provide that. That's really not an enforceable promise. It's a promise to make a promise. You're going to try and do it if you can, and you need to understand that if you're not going to guarantee the no smoking rule or the room with the biggest bed, then you need to say something like, we're trying our best. Don't say we promise it to you, or yes, you will have a no smoking room unless you know you can deliver it. Be very clear about what you're agreeing to do and not agreeing to do. If you add on any fees or charges, and a lot of hotels now, and we'll go over this a little bit later on, are unbundling all their rates on the internet. So if your normal room rate's $150, but you see your closest competitor is posting a room rate of $125 on the internet, you figure you've got to somehow get your rate down to $125. So many hotels will unbundle the rates, and they'll separate out things like resort charges and fees to use the fitness room and fees to use the internet, and et cetera. And that's all fine. You can do that, but you've got to let the guest know that before he or she books the room. So when the guest says, all right, I'm willing to take the room, you can't say to yourself, okay, and I'll just at the end when he checks out, I'll add on the $3 energy surcharge and the $5 minibar surcharge and the yada, yada, yada. The Federal Trade Commission says that that is illegal. It's illegal under the laws in California and most other states as well. So you need to be very clear about what it is the guest is going to have to pay. Holdover guests, we run into this frequently where you've guaranteed a room to somebody, and the guest who is in the room today and supposed to check out decides not to, and now you no longer have a room for the guest with a guaranteed reservation. I don't know if that's problematic for you. It isn't for a lot of people except for special events like Super Bowl and New Year's Eve and things like that. And we put a law in the Civil Code a number of years ago that gives you some rights if that kind of thing happens, so that you can make it clear to the guest you got to follow the procedure in Civil Code Section 1865, and I'll be happy to send it to you if you want. You tell the guest, you know, tomorrow there's a guest with a guaranteed reservation checking in. You need to check out by 11, and if you don't, we're going to collect your belongings. We'll give them back to you, but we'll collect your belongings and rekey the door and sell the room. So you need to be able to do that. When guests promise to stay there for 2 or 3 or 4 nights or a week or whatever it is, and they leave early, you're entitled to collect for all the days they didn't stay, unless you've agreed to something else. So when a guest checks in and it says, I want to stay here and I'll pay you by the night, and you say that's fine, that's one thing. But if you say it's, you know, we have a minimum of 3 nights stay over the New Year's weekend or something like that, and the guest says, fine, I'll pay you extra room rate for each night for 3 nights. The guest has promised to take it for 3 nights and to pay you for 3 nights. And if the guest leaves early, you're entitled to collect for the other nights. Now, I did tell you earlier on covering on this page what a contract is, and that if you fail to provide a room to a guest when you promised one, then you have some liability. The liability is really what it is the guest would have received and the value of that, but for the fact that you failed to provide a room. And that usually means the cost of another room somewhere else, which could be more, maybe incidentals like a taxi, phone calls home to let people know that they're could you go back, please, Janae? Thanks. And so you do have some liability. Most hotels have a policy that if they have to walk somebody, this is what they're going to do. They're going to pay for a room somewhere else, taxi to get them to the other hotel and bring them back, etc. You're not liable for damages for broken business deals and things like that. And I also told you that if a guest fails to carry out his or her side of the bargain, you can collect from them. The biggest problem that you all face has to do with guests who guarantee the room with a credit card and then don't show. Many of those people know that they don't have to worry about it, because when the charge shows up on their credit card bill at the end of the month, they just challenge it. And I hate to tell you this, but the vast majority of times, especially with Visa cards, and I have nothing against Visa, this is what I've got, Visa just will not honor the hotel's right to get paid. And so if it becomes a real problem for you in dealing with chargebacks for guests who don't cancel in accordance with your policy, talk to your credit card, payment card processor. They might have some good ideas. But basically, the agreements that you all sign, that all merchants sign with the credit card apparatus, the merchant banks require you to do certain things, and they really take away a lot of your rights, but that's what you've agreed to as the trade-off in your ability to use payment cards. Okay, Janae, thank you. Next slide. Basic obligation to provide rooms. The starting point is that hotels and inns, like common carriers, buses, trains, etc., have some special obligations under the common law, which is the basic law that applies across the country. And it states that innkeepers must provide rooms to all who seek them unless the innkeeper has appropriate grounds to refuse rooms. And we'll go through those in a minute. And in California, there's a penal code section. It is a crime, and it's been many, many, many years since there have been any prosecutions under it, but there have been some. It's a misdemeanor to refuse to give rooms to somebody unless the innkeeper has just cause or excuse. And we will go through in a moment what just cause or excuse means. So that's the basic obligation to provide rooms. You just need to understand that things like we reserve the right to refuse service to anybody probably is not going to ever help you. There will be times when you will have a right and an obligation to refuse service, and we'll go through that, but just adopting the policy that you get to pick and choose who's going to get in the hotel and stay there is a real fallacy and gets you in a lot of legal trouble. Okay, the next slide goes into two other laws that apply in California on the same subject. One is the California Uncivil Rights Act, and it prohibits discrimination by any business, hotel, restaurant. It doesn't, if you're a business, this applies to you, and it covers the obvious things, and I do want to mention physical or mental disability, but it also includes age, and we'll get into the minor in a hotel situation in a moment. If you violate the Uncivil Rights Act, the minimum damages a person can collect from you are $4,000 plus his or her attorney's fees, which are usually the vast majority of any liability, financial liability you would have if there's a situation like this. Also, we have the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. It covers discrimination in employment, which is not the topic of our discussion today, but it also covers housing, and the Fair Employment and Housing, the Department of Fair Employment and Housing has called me several times over the last 30 years and said, look, you got to tell the hotels that as far as we're concerned, we're not just about housing like people buying a home, a single-family residence or an apartment house. We cover hotels too. So all of our prohibitions, which go beyond those in the Uncivil Rights Act, also apply to hotels. And one of the things it clearly deals with is discrimination based on age. So with that, I'd like to talk about the topic of refusing rooms to minors. And Janae, if you could make the magic of the electrons switch pages. Thank you. Under both the Uncivil Rights Act and the Fair Employment and Housing Act, I'm just going to say this very quickly, that it is illegal in California. Don't do it. It is illegal to adopt any sort of a blanket policy to not let people under 18 into a hotel. Now, you can have a legitimate right to refuse a room or accommodations to somebody under 18 who, on an individual basis, gives you just cause or excuse not to give him a room. For example, if you have somebody checking in and he's under 18 and he doesn't have the ability to pay, you can refuse a room. Not because he's under 18, because he can't pay. That's a right you have with regard to anybody. But a blanket policy that we're not going to provide rooms to people under 18 or et cetera, those are clearly illegal policies and get you in a lot of trouble. I just had a lengthy situation involving a hotel in the Carmel Valley. Their website had some language in it. It was unfortunate, and it cost them about $13,000 to settle the problem. Things that I have found on websites are statements like this: no pets or children under 12, or quiet, well-behaved children over the age of 5 are allowed in designated guest rooms only. We strongly discourage children under the age of 6, or we cannot accommodate children under the age of 12, or the minimum age for guests is 18 years old, or rooms hold up to 4 persons 12 years of age or older because of safety, or the blanket statement, children cannot be accommodated at the hotel. If you've got anything like that in your policies and procedures, if that's what your reservation people are taught to say to people, if it's on your website, you are really dealing with a very dangerous situation. It is illegal to have that kind of policy. And I do know also that some third-party reservation systems imply that it is okay to prohibit or limit minors. So, for example, when you're filling out the template, there'll be a place, for example, where you can, for pets, you can say yes, no, or limited. And then for minors, you can put in yes, no, or limited. And if you are using one of those reservation services, one of those third-party booking engines, and you indicate anything there other than you accept all minors, you are in serious trouble. So be sure you look at what you have filled out whenever you have a online booking system handling rooms for you. I mentioned a minute ago that this policy, or the law against having blanket policies to accept minors, applies to policies like, children not allowed here. But again, if you have an individual minor, somebody who has individual characteristics such as he can't pay or he's been there before and caused problems, etc., you can refuse to give him a room. And then we do have laws that we got passed, CHLA introduced a number of years ago, that do help you, though. So if a minor comes in unaccompanied by his or her parent or guardian, you can lawfully refuse to give him a room unless the parent or a parent or guardian signs an agreement to pay the minor's charges and for any damages he or she might cause. And if you want to have a blanket policy that says if you come in here under 18 and you're not accompanied by a parent or a guardian, you can stay here only if you get that signed agreement and give it to us. If you have that policy, you've got to apply it uniformly. You can't do it only for people who are from Lithuania, not for people who are from Poland or religion or whatever else. Obviously, you cannot discriminate. And then lastly, in this regard, young children accompanied by their parents, and this seems to be the biggest problem. We got a law passed that said if children under 12 come in accompanied by their parents, you cannot refuse to give them a room. So these examples I gave you a minute ago, just they're unlawful. But you can refuse to give a room to a family with small children if you have a policy that says that they are going to, and you get them to say this in writing, they are going to agree that while they're there, they will keep the young children under their constant care, supervision, and control. And if they fail to do that, it's grounds for eviction, and you don't have to give them their money back. And so I wrote up just a sample policy that you could adopt if you want to. You can make it longer or shorter if you want. So, Janae, if you give them the next page, I'd appreciate it. This is something I wrote out, and again, this just spells out what the law allows. If you want to have a blanket policy that families with kids 12 years of age or younger can stay here only if the parent signs something, etc., to this effect, then that's perfectly lawful. Again, just don't discriminate. Okay, now again, remember, if you have questions, I don't see any questions up here, so if you have questions, just tippity tap them in and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, next slide. So what are the lawful grounds that you can refuse to provide a room to somebody? This is the just cause or excuse portion of the penal code provision we've provided. If you have just cause or excuse, you can refuse to give me a room. First of all, you have no rooms. So if you don't have any rooms, and this seems silly to even talk about it, but it's self-evident, but if you have no rooms, and you refuse to give me a room, you've got no problem. This becomes problematic in two cases. One, when you have holdover guests, because if you had enforced your holdover policy, you would have a room available, so you can run into some problems there. So you may have to actually get rid of people who are holding over beyond the term that they agreed, as long as you've complied with the Civil Code Section 1865, which I'll be happy to send to you if you want. Just email me. The other one has to do with ADA considerations, and basically the law says that if you have accessible rooms that are accessible for people with mobility impairments or hearing impairments, you've got to keep them available until they are the last rooms that you've got on the property, and then you can sell them to somebody else. So just be sure you have a good policy in place to deal with how you're going to handle the availability of rooms when it comes to disabled individuals. The next ground, lawful ground you can use to refuse to give somebody a room is the person presents no reasonable proof of ability to pay. So obviously, if you, in the vast majority of cases, you ask for a credit card or a debit card and it goes through and it's authorized, and that's fine. You can't refuse to give me a room based on my inability to pay as long as you've got that. You can set up whatever policies you want. If you want people to pay you with checks, fine. If you want them to pay you with no checks, that's fine. If you want them to pay you in cash, that's fine. Nobody does that, but if you want to do it, you can set up whatever policies you want as long as you apply them uniformly. One of the things that I've encountered over the years in talking to members is that a lot of places, particularly in rural areas, but in urban areas as well, is where locals come in and use the hotel as a party site on weekends, and it's just the locals. They come in and they trash the place. And so if you want to have a policy that we accept credit cards, except if you're a local, we will accept only, and it's on a weekend, we'll only accept cash, or we'll take your credit card, but we're going to ask for a refundable deposit of X dollars in addition. That's fine, as long as you've got a valid business reason for treating the people that way. You can kind of tailor the payment methodology based on actual business operation needs. Illness or contagious disease, this is a tricky one. You don't want to ask for too much information, but you need to be aware of the fact that you've got the right, but also the obligation not to let people who are seriously ill or have contagious disease in the property. This kind of, in one sense, can run into the ADA a little bit, but things like swine flu and those kinds of things become very problematic. And the law in California does requires that if you have somebody in the hotel whom you believe has a contagious disease, you're supposed to notify the local health official. And we recommend that as the good course to follow. Let them tell you whether or not somebody who you think might have tuberculosis or somebody who you think has swine flu or whatever else, let them guide you on the best way to handle it, both with respect to that particular guest and things like that, but also in terms of your other guests and your employees. People ask about HIV and AIDS. That is generally not a contagious disease in the normal course of events in the sense of hand-to-hand contact or things like that. And it is also a disability, so be careful how you deal with that kind of situation. Objectionable conduct. This goes into the situation that deals with people who you have reasonable ground to believe are going to disturb the peace and quiet of the other guests, who are going to abuse the other guests or your employees, who are going to pose any kind of physical threat to anybody else. If you have somebody whom you believe, either based on past conduct or just first impression, is if you have a reasonable ground to believe this person is going to engage in objectionable conduct, that is a valid cause to refuse to give him or her a room. Not only do you have the right to refuse the room, you've got a duty to refuse the room, because you as innkeepers have a duty of reasonable care to protect your other guests and your employees from abusive behavior, physical threats, things like that. So I got a call recently. This goes into this, and also if you believe people are going to maybe engage in illegal activity, prostitution, drug dealing, etc. Got a call from a hotel, and a lady, the manager, said to me, well, I got a guy called in here. He wanted to rent a room for 3 people over the weekend. And it came out in the course of the conversation that he wanted to rent the room to make a pornographic kind of a situation. Just based on that, the question is, does she have just cause or excuse to refuse a room? And the answer is no. It's not illegal in California to make a porn film. There's a United States Supreme Court case 20 years ago said absolutely that's not a problem to do that. So if I want to come into your hotel and do a porn film, I can't refuse to give you a room just on that basis. But you do have the right to tell the guests that that's fine. You can be in here, but just we're going to tell you that we won't allow you to engage in any illegal activity, like drug use or something like that. We are not going to allow you to make noise or disturb the peace and quiet of our other guests or running up and down the hall naked or, anything else like that. And if you do that just like anybody else, it has nothing to do with the porn film per se. It's just that we've got the right and an obligation, a legal obligation, to get rid of anybody in the hotel who engages in conduct that is disturbing the peace and quiet of the other guests, or something along those lines. But as long as you stay in your room, and what you want to do behind your closed doors is fine with us, as long as it doesn't bother anybody else. Illegal activity, you have an obligation to refuse to let people into the hotel and a duty to kick them out if they're already there. If they're engaging in illegal activities, selling drugs, prostitution, a lot of hotels are the favorite place for meth makers who settle in and make their potions. Very, very dangerous. You need to deal with it. Marijuana, a lot of questions come in dealing with marijuana. The answer simply is, if somebody says, I use marijuana medicinally, do you have to let them in the hotel? That's fine. They just can't use the marijuana there. And actually, they shouldn't even be in the hotel with the marijuana. Possessing and using marijuana is still a violation of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. It's illegal. The U.S. government has announced they're not really going to go after anybody much under that act if they're in a state like California that allows it for recreational use or medical use. But if you want to have a policy, and I strongly urge you adopt a policy that you're not going to allow people to use marijuana in the hotel, that's a very good thing to do. I want to go back on the same slide here for a moment about reasonable proof of ability to pay, and we get a lot of questions about debit and credit cards and the kind of information you can require and request from guests to use those cards. Next slide, please. Janae, thank you. There's a law in California that's been on the books for a long, long time, and it's starting to cause real problem, mainly for larger merchants like Williams-Sonoma and Walmart and places like that. And it basically says that if somebody presents a credit card to use to complete a transaction, you cannot require them to provide you with any personal information which you cause to be written or recorded in connection with the transaction. And the latest two cases have involved emails and zip codes, and the courts have said that if you make me give you an email address or zip code as a condition of having a transaction completed with you and I'm using a credit card, that's unlawful. The penalties are $250 per violation, and it goes up. That's for the first violation. It goes up to $1,000 per violation. So you imagine somebody like Williams-Sonoma, the thousands and thousands of transactions they've got, and if they're doing this routinely, I mean, the penalties are horrendous. So be careful with what you do. If you need information, that's fine, but don't require that they give it to you as a condition to completing a transaction where a credit card or a debit card, but particularly a credit card, is being used. However, you can require a card holder to provide you with reasonable forms of positive ID, like a driver's license or a California state ID card, or a passport or something else, so some other form of photo ID, as long as none of the information contained on that ID is written or recorded on the credit card transaction form or otherwise. I will caution those of you who are in cities or counties where there is an ordinance that requires that you provide the police with information about the guests in your hotel, and some of them require that you get a positive form of photo ID identification and that you copy it. It becomes problematic because on the one hand, you're being ordered by the local ordinance to do this. On the other hand, somebody could argue that you're collecting information and keeping it in violation of the statute that's covered on the slide in front of you. Bottom line is you really need to comply with the local ordinance, and so if you've got any questions in this regard, specific instances, let me know. I'd be happy to help you with that. Debit cards, no particular rules there, except that if you accept debit cards, you need to let guests know that if they don't use all the money that they've authorized to have taken from their bank accounts, you've got to let them know that the money might not be back there immediately. Some banks just take a long time to process that. I haven't seen many hotels with notices at the front desk about this or on their websites, but the California law does provide that if you accept debit cards, you need to let people know that if they don't use all of the money that they've authorized, that the money might not be put back in their account immediately. We covered chargebacks. You need to look at your merchant agreements, talk to your card issuers, talk to your, particularly to your processors, and find out what, if anything, you can do about guests who make reservations and then don't carry through and refuse to pay the penalty. Next slide, please. I want to cover very quickly some access issues, ADA. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Just remember there are two kinds of accessible rooms that every hotel and inn has to provide. There is no grandfathering, no matter when your property was built, and with very few exceptions, you've got to provide two kinds of accessible rooms, one for people with mobility impairments and one for people with hearing impairments. And I'm not going to cover what that means right now because of our time limit, but if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to go over all of this with you and let you know what it means. For reservation policies and procedures, the Department of Justice issued some rules in 2012 that tell you what you've got to do to make sure that people with disabilities can get guaranteed reservations for accessible rooms, just like anybody else can get reservations for the rooms that they want. And it also covers those of you who make bookings through third-party reservation sites. Accessible websites, this is important partly because it's a legal requirement that your websites are accessible to people with disabilities, hearing, sight, to people who can't handle a mouse because of physical disabilities, etc. We have a publication that we put together on how you can provide an accessible internet presence, and we'll be happy to send that to you if you request it. It's absolutely free and it's electronic, so just let me know. Service animals, under the federal law, the only animals that are recognized as service animals are dogs that have been individually trained to help somebody with a disability, and miniature ponies, miniature horses, which can be problematic. I will tell you that we've got some excellent materials on service animals, and I'll be happy to send that to you. The federal law does not recognize companion and comfort dogs as service animals because they haven't been specifically and individually trained to help anybody with anything. They're just good pets, and people like having them around. California law does probably allow somebody in a proper circumstance to claim that a companion or service animal, companion or a comfort animal is a service animal. So if you ever come into situations like that, you can take the obvious default most innkeepers take is that the federal law does not protect animals like that, but just recognize that California law and some city laws like San Francisco do protect the rights of people who have comfort or companion animals. The law requires that you allow segways and similar mobility devices in your property with some caveats. And then lastly, just to kind of help you digest all of this accessibility stuff, we have some ADA developments. It's a summary I put together. I'll be happy to email it to you. So just when this webinar is over, just email me and say, here are the things that I want you to send me, and this is one of them. I'll be happy to do it. Okay, once you get somebody actually in the hotel, next slide please, Janae. The rights of guests. Number one, they have the right to have you fulfill the terms of your agreement. That's just basic. So if you promise them and actually promise them a no smoking room and you didn't fulfill that, they're entitled to some recompense as a result of that. If you told them you would accept pets and now you don't, and they've got to go find another place that will let them in with their pets, you've got to pay for that. The amount will vary, and it's not easy to state right off the top of my head or anybody's head exactly what you might owe, but just recognize whatever you promise to give these people, you've got to give it to them. If you promise to give them a room and then tell them about the fee for the internet and for the fee for the breakfast and everything else, you can't just go unilaterally change the contract. You owe them what you promised to give them without tacking on any extra charges. Guests have the right to privacy in their guest rooms. This means basically that you and your staff have no right to go into the guest room just because you want to, but you do have the right to go into the guest room whenever you need to in the normal course of your operations and under reasonable time. So if you go into the room routinely to clean the room, etc., and they say, we don't want you to come in here and clean the room, you've got the right to go in. Now, obviously, if it's a situation where you say, okay, I can understand why these people want to be left alone for a couple days, that's fine, but you cannot, you're not bound by a guest who puts the do not disturb sign out and leaves it out there forever. You get the right to go in there when you need to for maintenance, for cleaning, to make sure they're not committing a crime, etc. I'm going to skip the next two, but this obviously, these are just very obvious rights that guests have, not to be insulted and not to have you hold them or detain them against their will under any circumstances. Protection against disclosure of a personal information, that is a topic all by itself, and I find that most hotels and inns are woefully unaware of, unprepared for, complying with the obligations that require that you protect personal information, which is not just the credit card information. It includes all personal information that you have and get under any circumstances in connection with your business. And if you would like some information on the basics of that, just contact me and I'll be happy to go through it with you. Rights concerning rates and fees and charges and things like that, we've already gone over that, but you can't start adding on charges and fees that you didn't tell me about up front. And then lastly, you know, guests have the right to have you properly handle the mail, packages, and faxes. But if you don't, or wake-up calls or things like that, your liability is going to be very nominal. So if you fail to give me a wake-up call and I didn't get to the airport on time and I didn't get to the other city and make $1 trillion profit in a business deal, you're not liable for that. You may be liable because maybe my later flight costs more or something like that. Rights of innkeepers, next topic. So you've got some rights too. You have the right to have the guest fulfill the terms of the contract as well. So if the guest promised to stay there for 4 nights and leaves after the 2nd night, you can get paid. If the guest promised not to show up with a pet and shows up with a pet, you're entitled to have the guest pay you for whatever damages or problems have been caused by that. If the guest promises not to smoke, you're entitled to have the guest pay you for the damage caused by the smoking. You have the right to pick and change the guest's room. The guest's right of privacy in the guest room is not unlimited. As I mentioned to you, you've got the right to go into the guest room whenever your normal business operations dictate that you need to go in there. Obviously, you do it at an appropriate time. You don't go in at 3 in the morning to fix the air conditioner. You don't just walk in unannounced. Obviously, you do it in the proper way. Defrauding an innkeeper, and actually that should be Penal Code Section 537. Janae, maybe I forgot to catch that yesterday. If you could, in the next one, go around of these slides, maybe just change that 602S to 537. So if a guest leaves without paying, you have the right to, it's a crime, you can go to the district attorney. You can obviously sue them in a small claims court or to get your money back, but it's also a crime, which is a good thing in the sense that it will often leverage guests who try to sneak out on you to pay up. And then you have the right to evict guests if lawful grounds to do so exist. And let's go into the eviction process. Janae, the next slide, please. This is a list of the grounds that allow you to evict somebody. And basically it's the flip chart, or excuse me, the flip side of the coin of grounds that are available to you to refuse to give me a room in the first place. So if I'm in the hotel, the things that would have allowed you to refuse to give me a room also allow you the right to evict me. The one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, though, is that the law in California and in many states draws a distinction between a guest and a tenant. If you have a full-service hotel, and I use that term to mean a hotel that has a restaurant, room service for food, maid service, mail service, phones, safety deposit boxes, and you provide stays of 7 days or less. If you're a full-service hotel, people who stay with you never become tenants just because they've stayed with you for a certain period of time. There's a big caveat to that, and I'll go over it in a minute. If you're not a full-service hotel, in other words, if you're a hotel that doesn't provide all of the amenities I just mentioned, then a guest who stays with you 30 days automatically, without anybody doing anything, becomes a tenant on the 31st day as long as he or she paid you whatever was owed as of the 30th day. So if I check into somebody's hotel and I stay there 35 days and as of the 30th day I've paid everything I owed, I can look at the innkeeper and say I'm no longer a tenant, I'm going to start smoking in the room, I'm going to bring in my dogs, and I'm going to quit paying, and the innkeeper can say, well, I'm going to evict you, and I'm going to say, that's fine, but you can't just lock me out. You've got to go through the unlawful detainer process that applies to landlords and tenants in apartment houses. If, however, I am a guest, either because I'm in a full-service hotel or because I've been there in your hotel that's limited service for less than 30 days, then you've got the right to evict me without going to court. You can just lock me out, collect my belongings, rekey the door. If you get into that kind of situation, you need to kind of be careful. If you think there's going to be violence or something like that, then you need to consider whether you're going to get the cops involved. Also, if the guest is truly a guest and quits paying, Penal Code Section 602S makes it a trespass for the guest to refuse to finish paying you if you give him reasonable notice of the amount owing and that he's got to pay. And if he refuses to, the police can take him away. They are reluctant to, but the law does allow that. And then if you have the reasonable grounds to evict me, you've got to be careful how and when you do it, because you can't just throw me out in the middle of the night in a dangerous area, or if I'm sick, or if it's pouring, or you've got to be careful that in the way you do it, you don't physically harm me, that you don't defame me by yelling up and down the halls, you're a crook, get out of here, things like that. You've got to be very careful how you do it. Next, please. There are a number of legal issues relating to room rates and pricing. One, you've got to put post your room rates in the guest rooms. It's got to be in a conspicuous place. And be sure you change the rates on the cards whenever you change your rates. I've seen hotels where they put up a card 20 years ago and never changed the rates, even though they charge a lot more now. So you need to be sure to post the room rates. You also need to be aware that you can't have any gender discrimination pricing. You've got to be careful with reduced charges for men and women. Surcharges, resort fees, and other charges, we talked about that. They're fine to charge them as long as you let me know up front what it is you're going to require me to pay when I have time to agree to it or not. Commissions and kickbacks from vendors can be very problematic. A lot of hotels do that, so I want to just to make you aware of that situation. I can provide more information to anybody who wants it. Natural disasters, it's unfortunate, but when there are natural disasters, some people raise their rates. There's a law in California that prohibits that. Intentional overbooking for special events like the Grand Prix or Laguna Seca or something, the prosecuting attorneys, especially in the Monterey Peninsula, have gone after hotels who intentionally overbook and jack up the rates and things like that. Lottery sales, if you want to say, throw your card in here and you can enter a lottery to get a free room night, that's fine, but there are some restrictions, and there's a pretty comprehensive set of rules that I'll be happy to send to you if you want to let you know what those requirements are. Okay, next, please. People often ask, what about the posting? What do I have to post in a room? First of all, you've got to post the room rate card, period, end of argument. Also, you have to post what we call emergency procedures notifications. These are what most people would call fire safety notices. And I know all of you got something on the back of the door that says something. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. And I don't care what you got on the back of the door, I'll bet 90% of you don't have the things you've got to have. California has a specific fire marshal regulation, section 3.09, and I'll be happy to send you an explanation of it, that says basically this. You've got to have on the back of the door, nowhere else, at a certain height, a certain size sign, with certain size font, with certain contrast, that tells me 4 things. It has to have a floor plan of the floor I'm on showing certain things. It has to tell me what your fire alarm, if you have one, sounds like and looks like. It has to tell me to call 911 or 9911 in the event of a fire or other emergency. And it has to tell me not to use the elevators, to use the stairs, even in an emergency. That has to be posted on the back of the door in the guest rooms. It has to be posted in every elevator lobby and every stairwell lobby and inside every public entrance to the hotel. And just my own personal anecdotal observations are virtually no hotel rooms in California have those signs. They have stuff up, but it doesn't have what's required under the California Fire Marshal regulations. And I've got an explanation that I'll be happy to send to you if you just let me know that you want it. It also, by the way, this requirement says that this information has to be made available in a format that's usable by people with disabilities, including people who are blind or sight impaired. It also, you have to have something on your registration card or somehow when I check in that lets me tell you that I've got a disability and I'm going to need assistance in the event of an evacuation. Most hotels don't do that. And God forbid there's a fire or other emergency and there's somebody who's disabled and somebody gets hurt. Notices about lost, damaged, or stolen property. I'm going to just go over this very quickly because I'm going to cover it in more detail in the next slide. But there's some extra protection that you are afforded if you post a certain notice in the guest room about the limit on your liability for lost, damaged, or stolen property. CHLA has a room rate card posting cards that we can give to you. I don't know if there's a charge or a nominal fee of some kind or they're free, but that incorporates the room rate card requirements and the notices about stolen property, etc. You can get them from CHLA. If you charge me to use the phone in the room, or even if you don't, you've got to have posting requirements under federal law and under California law. And then Prop 65, if you provide food or beverage in the guest rooms, you've got to provide certain notices under Proposition 65. The notices that tell me that if any of these things contain chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, you're providing them warning up front, which is what Prop 65 requires. The next slide, guest property. Basic law in California is that unless you agree in writing to be liable for something more, your maximum liability for the losses that a guest suffers for lost, damage, or stolen property, regardless of how much or what it's worth, is $1,000. So unless you do something and again, what you do or could do is agree in writing to be liable for more, the law in California limits your liability to $1,000. So if I lose $1 million ring in your room, I don't get $1 million, I get a maximum of $1,000. And then property like valuables, if you have a safe and I don't use it, you can avoid liability altogether if you post that notice that we just talked about in the guest room and tells the guests that we have a safe, and if you don't put all your valuables in there with us, we're not going to be liable at all. Lost property and abandoned property, the laws differ, and there are special procedures you follow with respect to lost property as opposed to abandoned property. We've got a little blurb that will explain the difference to you, and happy to send that to you. Alcoholic beverages, Janae, the next slide, please. Dealing with minors, obviously you can't allow minors, people under 21, to have anything to do with alcoholic beverages. If you have mini bars in your hotel, you've got to be sure that you have policies and procedures in place to make sure that nobody under 21 is going to be in a room by him or herself if you have a mini bar, unless you remove all the alcohol or lock the mini bar. A lot of issues dealing with prom nights and graduation nights are very problematic. We've got some guidelines that can help you deal with those kinds of nights, situations, and events, so be sure to ask for that. Wine and on-sale permits for bed and breakfast inns. There are some very specific permits and licenses that B&Bs can get so that they can provide wine and other alcoholic beverages. They're very cheap, easy to get, and so if you want information, just let me know that. And then limited service lodging establishments, which are lodging establishments that don't have a restaurant open to the public and don't have a bar, a regular bar like you see on the corner. There is a special license you can get that's relatively cheap, and it allows you to have mini bars. It allows you to have managers' receptions like the Embassy Suites kind of situation. And it also allows you to have beer and wine sales in the lobby if you wish to do so. So if you want information about that, you're welcome to let me know, and I'll be happy to send you a blurb that will explain all that to you and tell you how to go about getting one. And then last but not least, and right about 10 o'clock, I think. Next slide, please, Janae. If you've got questions, please type them in. Nobody has typed any in here, so either you're intimidated or whatever, but I'm here to help you. So I'm just trying to see here. Okay, I see something from Jim Johnson. What I'm running into is that they will simply dispute the charge of their credit card company. We lose to the credit card company. This goes back into the chargebacks, absolutely. And this is very problematic. As I said, you just need to go to your credit card processor, but you've got to recognize that you're going to lose those. Looking at questions, casino is age 21 and above, no reason for anyone under 21 to register in a hotel. How would this policy apply? You're basically, the question is, can you require that people be at least 21 to register in the hotel? That is problematic, but it can be done. That's Gary Gladstone. And Gary, give me a call if you need more information on this. How does federal law apply? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Gary, tippy-tap a question here. I'm going to go on. And again, David Poole, you asked the question, is it better to not have a policy and just deal with it individually? I'm not sure, again, what kind of a policy. Okay, question is, can we require that minors, this is from David, can we require that minors be accompanied by a parent or a guardian as a policy? The answer is basically no if you're dealing with somebody who's other than a small child. But if somebody 15 or 10 years or so, let's say, walks into the hotel and wants a room, if the person's got money, if you don't think he's going to cause a problem, whatever, you've got a problem on your hands if you have a blanket policy against refusing rooms to people like that. If that particular individual minor, though, presents you with reasons to not give them a room, then you can deal with it again. David, let me know if you need more. Again, just email me at jim@calodging.com, and I'll be happy to go over it with you. I'm just looking at it says here the guest folio has ID info and card transaction. What should we do about that? You've got to save. This is Gary Gladstone again. Gary, you've got to safeguard that. The rules get very complicated, and all of you should have a policy and procedure in place that you maintain and follow religiously about safeguarding personal information, which is not only ID, but email addresses, everything. I'm trying to catch these questions. Okay, how young can a person be to stay unattended if their parents sign the waiver? And if you're asking how long can they be left unattended in the guest room or something like that, you're not a babysitting service, so you can require that the parents are the ones who are going to be responsible if they leave a young baby in the room and the baby gets hurt. Michael, if that's your question. Can you explain more about staff receiving commissions and kickbacks? I've got a piece on that, Michael, in Casino. I will go through and send something to you, but I'd like you, if you email me, it's just easier to hit reply, if you don't mind. And then the question from Claudia, what if someone else is paying for a room? How much info can we seek and ask on a credit card authorization form? You can ask whatever information you want to make sure that you get paid, and it's got to be signed by the person who is agreeing to pay the rate for somebody else. That's the one instance where you've got to have something in writing. And Claudia, again, if you have other questions, let me know. Room service charges, this is another question for Gary Gladstone. You can apply room service charges. There was a question in a court case some time ago about whether if a hotel added a service charge to room service, was that somehow unlawfully tacking on extra charges and fees without telling the guest about it first. And the court said, no, that's not problematic. You have the right to do that. And I'm trying to catch up with the last few. Can you refuse prepaid Visa cards that are not an actual bank debit card? The answer is yes. You can set your own rules about what it is you are going to accept. this is for Derek, what you're going to accept in the way of payment. If you don't want to accept debit cards, that's fine. It may not be a good business decision, but it's a legal thing to do if you want to. I think those are the questions. I'm looking. The question is, can a child of any age be charged the same as an adult, two persons in the same room? The answer is basically yes. You know, so you don't want to discriminate on the basis of somebody being a minor. Folks, I'm at 10 o'clock. I promised that this would only last an hour. We've covered an awful lot of information. And if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, let Janae know and she'll be happy to send it to you. And those of you who have specific questions or want more information, contact me, Jim at calodging.com. I'm sorry I don't have the time now to answer all these questions in depth, but this was to kind of give you a refresher course, put thoughts in your mind, questions in your mind, and then again, I'm your free resource. I will go over all of these individually with you and make sure you've got all the information that you need. Janae, anything else we need to do?
Yes, I think that covers everything. Thank you so much, Jim. And then just a reminder to everybody that if you are in or will be near the LA area or on the 22nd of January or in San Francisco on the 28th, that Jim and Jeff Thurell will be giving an in-person seminar. So please go to our website for more info to register, calodging.com/events. So that will go ahead and conclude things for today. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
One thing, if you're on there, Jim Johnson, give me a call or email. Thank you.